Thank you all for coming. This talk we were talking about accelerating green skills, building a skilled workforce with competency profiling. My name is Frank Crawford. I am the Education Committee Lead with Passive House Alberta. We are a small nonprofit working in Alberta to help promote the adoption of the Passive House High Performance Building Standard in Alberta. But you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to our two lovely speakers today. Jenny Peters is the first speaker, and she is the Director of Eco Canada. And beside her is Peter Andrejevich, who is the co-founder of Workforce Strategies. And I won't add anything else to take away from their time, so I will just turn it over to Jenny.
All right, thank you very much. I've got a little bit of a presentation before we get into our conversation with Peter today, just to give you a little bit of context about competency profiling, what Eco Canada has been doing in that space, and what we might want to be doing going forward. And then we'll talk a little bit more about competency profiling in general, and talk about the benefits to employers and to other groups, and why you should think about competency profiles for your own organization if you don't already have them. So let's go to the next slide. So Eco Canada has developed national occupational standards for 13 different specializations of environmental work across Canada. We have three main buckets of environmental work. We've got environmental protection, which includes air quality, water quality, waste management, environmental health and safety, and site assessment and remediation. Then we have the natural resource management sector, which includes energy efficiency as well as renewable energy, natural resource management in terms of fisheries and wildlife, mining, forestry, aquaculture, that sort of thing. And then we've got sort of a broad omnibus group we call sustainability, which includes a wide variety of different occupations which may not be on the ground doing environmental work, but are essential to the environmental space. So policy and legislation, communications and public awareness, education and training, and I know there's one more, research and development, in addition to sustainability. So we've got these competencies that we've developed across these broad different environmental specializations, and we've been using those as information for our stakeholders for developing their workforce going forward. Also information that educational programs can use to get some idea of what sorts of competencies they want their graduates to have when they come out of their programs. But lastly, we also use it for our certification, our EP certification. So an individual who's EP certified can be certified in, I think, up to 5 of these different specializations. Now, the last time we published this was in August of 2016, which unfortunately is quite a long time ago. Lots changed since then. And so we are working hard right now to develop a sort of more refined methodology to update these different specializations and the occupational standards corresponding to them. So we are working on getting those updated, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of my presentation. Let's go to the next slide. So just to give you a flavor of what our occupational standards look like right now, we've got technical competencies and we've got transferable competencies. And so the transferable competencies are what we could refer to as soft skills or personal or professional skills. They would include learning and creativity, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and so forth. So we've got a number of these different buckets of transferable skills that we identify as being important for environmental workers to have. I have to emphasize that collaboration component. Every time I speak to a stakeholder out there, they're saying this work is multidisciplinary. We have a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds coming together to work on a project, and if they don't speak the same language, they have to be able to communicate somehow. So that collaboration and communication is really one of the essential elements of environmental work. Next slide. And I know this is really small, sorry. You can see them big on our website. Again, these occupational standards are all available for free on our website. But this is an example of our technical competency dictionary. And so we've got them broken down by subcategories of types of work. In this case, we've got conducting environmental and social impact assessment. And then we've got a number of different types of performance statements or task statements that identify what a person needs to be able to do, and then we've mapped it across the various different specializations so you can see which of the competency statements apply to each of the specializations. So that's the way we've got it set up right now. We're moving into a new era of competency profiling, thank you very much, where we're going to look at it from a more role-specific point of view. So I want to give you an example of a competency profile that we've already got up on our website. A couple of years ago we did a series of competency profiles, I think 36 in total, for the ocean sector, the blue economy. And so I've got here a fisheries biologist as an example of one of our competency profiles. Each competency profile we're developing is going to have an overview, a summary of what a person can be expected to, or what they can expect from that particular role. We break down additional information in terms of, what other types of job titles these people might run into, what sort of education and experience they're going to need to have. And then we've got what's called the NOC, the National Occupational Classification, which identifies which of the 515 occupational classification categories it falls into according to Statistics Canada. So that is a way for you to find out more information from the Job Bank or Statistics Canada or other sources. We've got 4 different types of competencies that we are identifying for these new competency profiles. We're doing technical competencies, personal and professional competencies, legislative and regulatory and policy competencies, and then what we refer to as environmental competencies. So competencies that are really specific to environmental work. So in this case, a technical competency for a fisheries biologist would include the ability to conduct scientific research projects. We have the heading, we have the short synopsis of what that involves, so they design and implement research projects. And then we've got a series of performance statements which also give us additional insights into what specific tasks people are going to need to do in that role in order to be able to accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish. So each of these performance statements is a do what, to what, for what purpose type of statement. So it gives you the context of what's important and why it's important. A typical personal and professional competency that we see across all profiles, communication, but there are other ones that are more specific to fisheries biologists, for example. The legal, regulatory, and policy competencies, so you need to be familiar with the regulatory environment in which you're operating as a biologist. And then the environmental competency. In this case, we've identified fish sampling as one specific environmental competency that's going to be in demand for fisheries biologists to have. So these competency profiles, the 36 that we've got online, are just the start. We're currently working on another, let's see, these are the 36 that we've got for the sustainable blue economy. We've got offshore minerals and resources. We've got ocean technology, we've got marine transport and shipping, marine renewables, fisheries and agriculture, aquaculture, and then coastal and marine tourism. Right now, our research team is involved in a number of different types of research and competencies. A lot of it is focused on the electric vehicle battery supply chain, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about in the news. One of the concerns that our funder, ESDC, has is that we may not have enough people, or enough qualified people, let's put it that way, to engage in the production and mining of the critical minerals, the EV batteries, the EVs themselves, and then recycling and recovery. So we've been developing competency profiles for those sorts of roles as well, specific to the EV battery supply chain. And then moving forward, this is where we're going to start to go back into those specializations, those core environmental specializations that we've looked at, that we've had occupational standards for over time. We're starting with sustainability. We're looking at climate change planning, we're looking at GHG verification and auditing, and we're looking at sustainability specialists and managers. We're then going to move into waste management occupations, water quality occupations, and air quality occupations. So we're slowly moving towards that kind of more role-specific approach to developing these competencies going forward. So that's sort of our plan at Eco Canada. Now that I've done my spiel, I think that's the end. Let's get rid of the questions. Thank you. Now I get to talk to Peter. Peter is our competency profiling guru. He has helped us develop our process for developing competency profiles, and we are indebted to him for all of his assistance. And so I wanted to give him an opportunity to talk a little bit about the work he does and how it relates to competency profiling at Eco Canada and how we can use that competency profiling going forward. So. Peter, tell us a little bit about the process of writing and validating a competency profile.
Okay, well, so there are two ways to do it. The way that ECO is doing it for their stuff is at the national level, so they are not the experts. Maddie, smart as she is, she's not an expert in any of these roles. So what she ends up doing is she ends up doing a ton of research. Then she looks at a bunch of job posts, as many as she can gather, and then she builds these profiles. And then with the step that we're actually in now, we've got almost all 36 profiles draft ready. We're looking for validators. So we send it out to the community at large to say, hey, if you're this kind of a person or near enough to this kind of person, give us your feedback, because we're not experts. I don't know anything about waste management, and yet we're pulling up a waste management manager profile. So that comes up to you guys. The other way to do it is, if it's specific to your organization, is that we actually come in and we would have your people, the incumbents of the job, actually write the profile. So we come in, we work with them, they write the profile, so that we know that it's right, and we know that it's right for you. So the big challenge when you're doing it at the national level, as I'm sure many of you have seen and noticed, is that there are companies that are 1 or 2 people, and then there are companies that are 10,000 plus people. And how do you write a profile that fits everybody? So these ones tend to be relatively generic and broad, because we got to try to capture a few things. Because in a small organization, you're going to wear a few different hats potentially, or you're going to have a lot more breadth in your role. And on the big organizations, you can be very narrowly focused. And so that's how they are all written. And so when we come down to your organization, or better yet, have Jenny come down to your organization. I've written hundreds and hundreds of competencies, and I don't want to write any more competencies. So Jenny and her team are awesome. They're getting really, really good, so go to them. But once you've got these competencies for your organization, we actually make them very specific. So we can start talking about not, uses GIS software. That's a term that they have. We'll actually say, using this specific GIS software, because that's what you use in your organization. And so you got to build those down. And so the way we build it is, as Jenny mentioned, they have to be a competency. The way we define it at our company is it's the combination of your skills, experience, your knowledge, your aptitudes, and your attitude. It's all of those things applied in a specific way for a specific outcome. And so every competency, or every good competency, should have a what are you doing, to what, for what outcome. And if you can't define that, then you're just writing a task statement. And we had some wicked arguments at our company as we built some of our graphics, but we have this neat graphic, and I should have sent it to you, but I didn't, because I didn't think of it until now, is that the value of a task statement, which is what a lot of people, when they're thinking competencies, they're thinking task statements. They're like, do this, push this button, then this button, then this. Those are task statements. Those are useful when you're in a very bound occupation, or in a bound role. It's very set, there's no options, there's nothing that you can change. As soon as you start getting more ambiguity, more autonomy in the role, they become completely worthless. And whereas competencies, the way we define them, are useful right across the board. And so you can think of a surgeon. If you go in on operation tables, a surgeon, on one hand, is task-bound. It's certain things. You slice this, you do this, you open this, you check this. But if they open you up and they see something different, you want them to not be like, oh, can't do anything, sew you up and let you go. You'd prefer them to finish, pull it apart, and it's actually a story from one of my partners. He had his rotator cuff redone, right? And that's exactly what happened. It was supposed to be a 45-minute little surgery, and in the end, they actually pulled off his arm, put it somewhere, fixed it up, put his arm back on, and sewed it up, because that's what was required. And thank God that the surgeon was competent, right? So that's kind of like, where we're talking about all this stuff and all these arguments that we have in our own company and how we structure this and how we change this and what needs to be done. And I will stop answering your question because I don't think I've answered it, or maybe answered it and gone well beyond it. But what the cool thing is that at the end of 2022, IEEE, so the folks that set the standards around the internet, like HTTP, HTML, they actually came up with a standard for competencies. It's IEEE 1484.20.2. That looks, when we looked at it, we were like, that looks a lot like what we do. And this is what IEEE is saying is going to be for Web 3.0. So this is what the bots and the AIs are going to want you to do it in this way, apparently. So there's lots of other organizations and groups that are coming to the same conclusion that we've come to, and that's, which we're now imparting onto ECO, which is how these are built. And they're built in order to be modifiable. So when you go, and I suggest that you go to ECO's website, take everything. Take it all. It's free. Now you have a library, but you need to modify it. You need to make it specific to your organizations. And Jenny and her folks, they can help you with that.
Thank you for the plug. It's wonderful. So tell me, why should an employer bother to develop competency profiles for their staff?
I can actually draw on from a lot of other talks that I went to over the last couple of days, and the one that was today, the Talent Attraction one that Brian White led, and when I asked him a question, and he talked about it in his own experiences at the company he was working for. When you're hiring, particularly when you're hiring for a lot of the roles that are in the green economy, these are not low-level, grade 3 education roles. You need to have people that have gone through some schooling, they've put in the effort, they've put in the energy. When they show up, they want opportunities to grow, they want opportunities to develop. And when you're going to grow and develop someone, you need to have something to aim for, and you need to know where they are. And so, look, for me, competencies are really the foundation. This is the foundational piece where you can say, okay, you've come in, I've assessed you. Through the work that you're doing, I've assessed you. Now I understand where you are. Now you say to me, as Brian mentioned, I want to be a CEO, and I'm 23 years old, and I should be the CEO of Apple. Well, great. This is what the CEO of Apple requires, and here's where you are. And the pathway, we can draw you the pathway. We can actually walk you there. And then we can throw a little bit of cold water on your thing and say, and this is a 15, 20, 30-year process. It's not going to happen overnight. But you're able to draw those maps. You're able to draw those pathways. You're able to do that for succession planning. So you want to, your VP is leaving. Now what? Who's taking over? Did you prep anyone? If not, why not? I can't remember who was talking about it. I think it was also Brian, but he was talking about the fact that, Claudine was saying, the LMI is showing that there's a growing demand for green skills. But as, was it Michael, who's the host, the
Yes.
MC, he joked yesterday, there's a lot of gray hair in the room. Okay, so what happens when that gray hair is gone? So you're going to need more people, and then all your people are going to fall off the cliff because they're all going to retire. They've worked hard, they want their time. So how are you going to fix that? How have you identified the pathways for everyone coming from the bottom to the top? So again, competencies, and I could literally sit here for 3 hours and talk to you about them, but they are the foundational piece for hiring and retaining people, training and developing people, career pathing, succession planning. Those are all based off of competencies, because you need to know what you have, you need to know where you want to go, and then you can close those gaps. So.
No, I think we've had a conversation or two about this. There seems to be some cost benefit also to having competency profiles with related to the training opportunities.
Yeah, so we've gone into organizations and they've got coaching programs and internal training programs, or they're going to external trainers, and the good thing about competencies is that once you've articulated them, and it doesn't matter how, like you don't have to articulate it in this way. It's articulated any way that you're comfortable articulating it, but once you've articulated what you need people to do, and then you've assessed people against that, you're able to target the training. And so many organizations, you're moving someone from a frontline to a supervisor to a manager, and they need leadership training. And so you send them off to leadership training, and they come back and they're like, I was either overwhelmed by what I was told and learned, or I knew everything but module 3, I didn't know that one, but everything else I knew. Instead, why don't you focus that training, that coaching, the mentoring? It can be very focused and therefore saving you on training costs. And we know, and this is done through I forget what their acronym now is, but it's the American Training, or the Association of Training and Development, or something like that if you spend, and I think that the magic number is about 2% of payroll, on training your people, you get an outsized return. Like anything less than 2%, and it's quite common, particularly at the front line, to spend way under that, because we like to spend money on the executives, because they're important, but the value is created by the front line. If you're the owner, if you're the executive, sorry, but the value is the front line. Your job is to support that value creation, but that's where the value is. So if you can target your dollars specifically on the skills, only on the skills and the competencies that you need, you maximize your returns on that.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, one of the things that we found is that the question is, or the statement is, we need green skills. But then the question is, okay, what green skills? Well, first of all, what is a green skill? And, different occupations are going to need very different types of green skills. So from our perspective, the competency profiling work is a way for us to develop a better understanding within Eco Canada of what the green skills are that are going to be needed, but then to pass that information along to the people who are going to make decisions about the education and training of individuals, about the hiring and recruitment and retention of individuals. Even when it comes to immigration policy, for example, what types of occupations, what types of skills should we be looking for when we're including or attracting immigrants to Canada. So all of those sorts of issues are also, the competency profiling is, I think, a foundation to all of that type of information as well.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm an immigrant, but I came when I was 4, and I've lived here for 40 plus years. So I'm an immigrant, but I'm not. My parents are. My parents have educations from the old country that were never recognized here. And so when I see the work that they did, my parents probably should have earned hundreds of thousands of dollars more over their careers in Canada than they ever did. I see how we pull in the smartest and brightest of other countries, and then they show up and we're like, and here's a toilet brush for you, and here's a set of cab keys for you, and off they go. The reason that happens is because we don't have a good way to determine, can they do this job? So, I met a doctor, or my family met a doctor some years ago when one of my grandparents was in the hospital. He was a doctor from Poland who was working as an orderly at the hospital here. He had 20 plus years of experience in his job. And I remember at that time, I had just read an article about how we needed doctors of his specialization in this country, but he couldn't get his license here. And he ended up going to the South, because there all he had to do was write the tests and he was in. He was a surgeon again. So what we're hoping for at our company, and we're hoping that ECO is part of that and other organizations are part of this, because this is a group effort. It's not going to be any one organization that's going to do this. But what we want to do is we want to say if everyone, again, has competencies, then when someone shows up, you don't need to worry about proxies like education or experience. So, and that's, everyone's using those as proxies because that's the best thing we have currently. But what does education tell you? That they went through school. But can they do the job? Maybe, maybe not. What does experience tell you? My favorite example is, we want 10 years of experience of using X. I always like to use Excel because everyone usually knows how to use a spreadsheet. But so you need 10 years of experience in Excel. And so I've worked for 10 years and I've used Excel exactly once a year for 10 years. I have 10 years experience of using Excel. Or would you prefer to hire someone who's like, I have 6 months experience, but I used it every single day, including the weekends? Who would be the better hire, right? The depth of knowledge, the understanding is going to be different, and yet the experience. So for me, they don't equate. It's not a good proxy. What we need is as many practical assessments as we can. And how do you get those? Again, you take the competency statements that they have that ECO's using. The performance statements are the proof. That's your proof that they have this competency. And so if you're the hiring manager, you've worked with the HR manager, you've come up with what are these competencies, and now the HR manager can use those as screening questions or even screening practical assessments where, again, it makes sense. It doesn't always make sense. You're not going to have someone build a bridge to prove that they can build a bridge, but you could have them if you're a welder, and we just heard the Minister of Advanced Education speak of we need welders. Okay, well, I can test the welder in about 30 seconds. In fact, one of my partners, his dad used to be a welder in Ontario, and when he'd have a new person come in, he'd be like, go pick out this steel and weld this from the scraps. Sometimes he wouldn't even tell them what steel to take. And he said, I need this kind of a weld done. And if you didn't know what steel and you didn't know how to weld it, you obviously didn't know what to do. 30 seconds later, the guy was out the door or he was hired. You didn't need anything else. With these more advanced jobs, with the jobs that you're doing in the green economy, again, some of those are challenges. But if you need an engineer, and there's lots of engineers around, if you need a specific kind of engineer, and I talked to one of my friends and I said, he's an electrical engineer, he's a manager now, but I was like, how long, if I sat someone down in front of you, how long would it take you to figure out if this person is an engineer? I think he said it took about a minute. And then I said, could you come up with, and he's an electrical engineer, could you come up with an assessment that a person could do within say an hour timeline that would show you the skill level that they have? And he said, oh, absolutely. Well, then why aren't you doing that? Oh, well, we don't do that at our company. Oh, okay, fantastic, but why don't you do that? And again, that's where competencies are. It's because the competency isn't about the theory, the knowledge, the experience. The competency is all of that, your ability to do. And if you can't do, then we don't need you.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, no, good point. How do you see competency profiling or competency development occurring over the future? You mentioned the IEEE standard. What do you see going forward?
The technology is cool. The technology that's coming is cool. Like, so one of my partners, he was the director of training and development at Suncor for a number of years, and so he's kind of the brain trust behind some of the stuff that we do. And when we were talking to him, and he's like, what was lacking 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, is the technology that wasn't there. When you do something like this, a single profile you can manage, even 5 or 10 profiles you can manage. But if you're a larger organization and you got hundreds or thousands of roles, it's not a spreadsheet managed type of assessment. You can't do that. And so what's come out is there's companies in the US, there's companies out of, I think they're Swedish, and so they've come up with ways that you can actually house these competencies and then easily monitor and track what's happening. So now that we've got some of that technology, and with what IEEE envisions for the Web 3.0, the reality is that organizations are going to need to start developing something. You're going to start seeing more micro-badging, micro-credentialing, things like that, of that nature, because that's what you're going to own. And the cool thing is this is really going to democratize the worker's knowledge. Because right now, if I work for a company and I build a whole whack of skills. But if they're not accredited or if they're not certified, they're useless. I'm basically trapped in that organization as I progressed, and I can't go anywhere else. Now with micro-credentials, micro-badging, I'll take a look on, let's say, the blockchain. I'll take a look and I'll say, hey, because your WSP is here, I'm going to say, WSP said so, so this must mean something. And then it becomes a, how much do I trust the opinion of WSP? And if I say, yeah, these guys know what the hell they're talking about, therefore, this person has this competency. And eventually, that's all you're going to do. When you're going to go around, it's going to be, and I've never used Tinder, I got married before it existed, but you're going to have, the situation is going to be, I'm looking for a job, here's my skill set on the blockchain, verified by potentially, half a dozen employers or half a dozen supervisors or however it is. Here it is, this is my competency profile. These are all the things I can do. I only use these for my current job, but this is all the other stuff I have. Then you as the employers are going to say, I need a person who can do click, 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 these things. And the little bots and the AI is going to go, you as the employer said you can handle 20% of growing someone. The person said they can handle 20% of being grown. Boom, you're matched up. Now you each swipe, whichever way. I actually don't know which is accept or not accept. You swipe, and as long as you both swipe to accept, now the bots say, your calendar says you're free here, and your calendar says you're free here. Connect, and now you've done nothing beyond saying, I need this person. And now you've got an interview set up with someone. Like that's where we're getting to. And so if your organizations aren't already building some sort of rubric for the work that you do, you're going to find yourself woefully behind. Now, there's one big caveat to Web 3.0, and is that there will be more open and more sharing of information. Right now, we still have a lot of companies being like, no, this is mine. It's private. And I mean, I've been into dozens of companies. I've seen what they have, and I've seen what they say is no, this is mine. It's proprietary. And it's like, well, I was at another company that does exactly that. But okay, it's proprietary to you. No one else on the planet does that except for half a dozen other companies in your space. So, and that's the reality. So there's going to be some things that are absolutely, they're proprietary. Keep them to yourself. But everything else we're going to be able to share, and particularly this kind of stuff, because the idea behind it is it's the high tide raises all boats, right? Let's grow the pie. Let's grow it so that everybody who needs somebody can find the workers that you need. Like when we talk to people and we're like, what's preventing you from growing? If you could have something now, I'll give you $10 million, what is it? You tell me what you need. A lot of the companies that we talk to are saying we need people. Okay, well, there are people. There are people everywhere, and there's lots of unemployed people, and there's lots of people all over the world. And with technology today, you don't necessarily need the people here. Some jobs you do, but you can do that. But you need to understand. And again, this is that competency piece. You need to understand what you need them to do, and you need to articulate it, because it's great that it's in your organization or you have a job post. A job post, 20% of the job is in the job post. Less, sometimes you get a little bit more. And then my resume, I may have stretched my experience a little bit here and there, and I know people have completely outright lied on their resumes. So what does that mean to you? Where's the value in that? Assess them, check what they have, but articulate what you want. Because if you're articulating, and I know that you're going to assess me, I'm not going to walk in pretending I'm an engineer. I don't know enough about it. I'm not going to trick you. But if you're just going to talk to me, I've met a few engineers. I've known a few. I could probably say the right words for the first hour, and then I'm lost, right? But that's the reality. Anyways, again, I could talk about this for hours.
Well, let's throw it back over to Frank.
All right, well, so we have a few questions here, but this is supposed to be a conversation involving you guys. So I'll maybe give you 1 or a few minutes to think of some questions. I'll ask one, and then we'll come out to the audience for questions. So I guess one of the questions I had was, can you give us an example of when you worked with a company and implemented these competency bases and kind of what the result came from them?
Sure. One of the,
I guess without naming names?
Yeah, one of my favorites is there's a largish marine infrastructure company down in the States. And the senior project manager was leaving. And they had 9 project managers who were vying for that role. And the owner had one who I labeled the golden boy, because it just made it easy for me to understand who I'm talking about, but I named him the golden boy. The owner was like, that's the one. But for some reason, we don't understand why, he decided to bring us in and say, make sure. So one of my partners, he went there, he worked with the senior program manager to understand his role. Came up with, I think it was like 10 or 12 competencies for the guy's job. And then we went and assessed the 9 project managers. And it was a simple assessment. Green, yellow, red. Simple. The golden boy, all yellows and 1 red. 2 other guys were all green with a yellow each. Imagine what would have happened, and he hired one of the 2 with all greens. Imagine if he had hired the guy with all the yellows. He was not ready. The cool thing is that we then talked to the manager or the owner and we said, and now here's the pathway for Golden Boy to become ready. He's got a few years now, build him there, get him there. And the owner was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, it did not change the fact that the owner loved this kid. But it did change the fact that he didn't get promoted above people who were vastly better for that role than he was. And think about in your own lives. I mean, I know it's happened to me a couple times, but when somebody who's not as good as you or not as effective as you gets moved up over you, or, okay, I'll stop there. I got hundreds of stories. I could literally sit up here for 2 hours.
Yeah, the promoted to your incompetence level, I guess, is where it goes to. But yeah, let's open to the floor. Start here, and I'll come here, and then you can go to the next one.
I just had a question. And so what challenges should employers expect when building competency programs, like based on your experience, and how do we overcome those challenges?
I think one of the big challenges that we've seen is that often employers build the competencies and then shove them down onto HR, and then nothing really gets done. And so what we've seen and what we strongly advocate for is that when you're building competencies and you don't necessarily have to build a profile, because this is the cool thing, is that you can mix and match these competencies any way you want. So you can build the right role for your organization at the moment. But it really should live with operations. It needs to be the managers, it needs to be from the COO downward who use these, because that's who's supposed to use it. You're supposed to make sure that your people can do that. And so we had a client up in Edmonton, a steel fabricating company, and a number of years ago they had an accident, and a guy was very, very seriously injured. And they took it upon themselves to build their own program. And it did not live in HR. It was done at the floor level. Like, these guys, the managers or the supervisors, would walk around and assess. And they had I really liked the way they did it, because it was never oh, you can't do it, you're fired, but it was you can't do this job yet, so you don't get to work on this particular piece of equipment. We will get you the training in the next 2 weeks. If it had lived in HR, by the time it had arrived through the various channels to get to the HR group, then there was a problem. This person's been working for 6 weeks and maybe cut off a finger. You know what I mean? And so that's what we were trying to avoid. And so when you're able to understand where it should live and who should use it, the big pushback that we've seen is if you become too excited, and a profile should really not be more than 20 competencies. If you start getting above 20, it's really cumbersome, and managers and supervisors will absolutely not use it. So the balance is finding the right balance of what do we need, what's critical, and that's really what you want to focus on, is what are the critical competencies for the role. And once you get that, there aren't that many challenges. Like in that particular company up in Edmonton, when we talked to all their guys, they did it for safety reasons, but it improved quality and productivity. But when we talked to, we were brought in to, we didn't write the competency, we were brought in to audit them. And we sat down with them and we talked to all the workers, the frontline guys, the supervisors, And everybody loved it. They were like, oh, it's totally made us safe. No one's been hurt. Like, they went from in an industry where hitting 250,000 man hours without a lost time injury was, you were good. These guys hit 5.5 million man hours without a lost time injury. Like, their competitors were like, they're cooking their books, and we looked at their books and they weren't cooking their books. And like, that's what you can do, but you need to understand that there's a balance. And then there was one crew who did not like it, and we traced it right up to the VP that they worked for. So what are the challenges? The challenges are, you need to have, everybody needs to understand what it's for. And people get scared because you're assessing me? Oh, no, I don't want to be assessed. But you're not, we always advocate, don't fire, develop. Where possible. In some cases, you can't develop, but 99% of the time, I think you can develop them, right? So those are some of the challenges. There's a lot of fear, always, and once you get past that, once you've got everyone understanding what the purpose is, and that it won't be used to, cut people, people tend to be okay with it.
Thank you so much.
Same question, or?
It was really similar. Thank you very much.
Okay, anything else? Can't be it. Oh, there you go at the back.
What's the best way to structure an interview in order to get those competency levels out? Say for like a technical specialist, if you're someone who's more of a tradesperson, it's a bit easier, but as far as more of a technical specialist, borderline manager position, how do you dig that out?
So there you start getting, as you start getting into the called the upper echelons of an organization, you start getting into more behavioral based questioning. How would you react here? You use what you want to do is you want to use, say, if you're doing a probationary period, you want to use that time to really watch that person and how they interact. So if you need a manager who is a great leader, so they lead people. And so again, there's managing people and there's leading people. And managing people is one type of skill that's useful, and leading people is, you're not just managing their activities, you're growing them. So if I need a leader, you can ask things in your previous job, blah, 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 right? The typical behavioral questions that you would ask. But then you watch how they interact with people. How did they walk in to your office? How did they greet the first person they met? Bring in a junior person and have that person. Again, you can structure a series of assessments even for those types of work. For managers or executives, like we did build a CEO profile for one of your sponsors. And so it's up on their website. Again, go there, look at it, take it, it's yours. But you can do that, and then you can still work to structure that. Like, what does it make sense? Maybe it's I've heard of people taking, you're going to hire an executive, you take them out for lunch. How do they behave? I've heard stories where the person doing the interviewing tells the waiter, you will mess this person's order up. Better not be what they order. And it comes out, and how do they react? And so, again, there's still practical assessments that you can do to see how people react in various situations. But the big thing is that you want to understand, like, I want a person who's calm under pressure, who can correct a person without tearing them a new one. Great. So how do we build that kind of a scenario where that happens?
Front here.
Thank you. This ties more into some of the earlier conversation with comments on environmental practitioners and micro-credentialing. When you look at the landscape across Canada, you have some professions, like, so for me, as example, my background is in forestry and environmental management. So you have some provinces that have legislated right to practice. And then you have some areas where it's just, it's more of an accreditation, and if you build up a brand like Eco-Canada, then people respect that. And then you have, I work for Nova Scotia Community College, and we're developing micro-credentials as well. And so we're trying to figure out how to get recognition for those. And it just seems to me that two things. There's a lot of opportunity for synergies between organizations, and there's a lot of confusion over recognition. And I'm just wondering if both of you could perhaps comment on that.
Sure. you want to go first? Or?
Sure. So I think, we face the same questions from a lot of our stakeholders. And it goes back to what Peter was talking about earlier, which is you want them to be able to do the job. And so the question then becomes, okay, how do you identify whether they can do the job or not? And so when we're developing a micro-credential, one of the aspects of that is going to be to make sure that you've got kind of performance-type statements as learning objectives to be able to say, yes, we've assessed this person, they've gone through the micro-credential, they've done this particular task, they've had this particular outcome, and that's how they got their credential in the first place. So being able to elaborate and enunciate what the success of the micro-credential is going to mean for that individual is going to take that micro-credential up to the next level and make it much more valuable for the employer as well as the employee, and make it easier for regulatory bodies to recognize those sorts of outcomes. So I think, again, coming back to, we identify what can they actually do what they say they're going to do. I came out of school and all I could do was teach economics.
Right.
And I had to learn everything else on the fly.
Right.
And the unfortunate thing was, transitioning from one to the other, there was no micro-credential for me to take to learn to do that. So when individuals are looking for those upskilling opportunities, they want to make sure that it's going to be, they're going to get a return on their investment. And so without the awareness that the schooling that they're going to get, the micro-credential that they're going to get is actually going to lead them to be able to do what they need to do, that's where I think the information needs to be developed.
I think there's a lot to be said about cross-recognition, because I know throughout my professional career I've kind of suffered from organization fatigue, where like if you wanted to, you're a registered professional forester or PE&G, and then all of a sudden joining this organization and another organization, and there's a lot of, if you had a Venn diagram, like a lot of crossover with those credentials, and it would just so that's the other part of my question. I guess we're interested in hearing your comments on that, and like developing those synergies. Like, are there any efforts, or do you have any insight on that?
There, sort of. So right now, what you're describing is the silos that exist, and there's lots of silos that exist. Every organization is kind of doing their own thing. The nice thing is that that's okay. You can. You're just redoing a lot of other people's work. What's going to come, and that's really, again, that linking back to kind of the Web 3.0, is that and the big difference, say, between what we do right now and what IEEE wants people to do in the future is metadata tagging. Okay, you don't need to do that now because there's not much you can do with it now, but in the future, that's what you're going to need to start doing. And then what's going to allow is it's going to allow the little bots out there to compare your Apple, your Macintosh, to the Granny Smith and say, yeah, okay, they're apples, and then it'll be able to make some decisions for you. In terms of the micro-credentialing, again, it's the competency of collaboration and communication. If the organizations that in this space were to talk a little bit and say, okay, well, this is what it is, or if, for instance, the groups came together and said, this is what a competency, or a generic competency in communication looks like. Now we can all agree that this is it. You can teach it, they can teach it, everybody can teach it to the same standard. So again, the national occupational standards that Eco-Canada is doing, right? Link it to that, and you can pull those and you can say, okay, this makes sense for us. And if it doesn't, where are the tweaks? But ultimately, with the fractured nature of Canada and the way it is, and there's 13 different educational jurisdictions, and 13, you're even in the Red Seals, right? The Red Seal's a national program, but if you're a Red Seal plumber in Alberta, it doesn't mean you can go to BC and become a plumber tomorrow. You can, but it takes a little bit extra effort. So again, it's the fractured nature of the country. We would love to see that changed. We would love to, like our kind of BHAG, if you will, is that we have kind of a pan-Canadian framework that is housed at the national level, supported by the provinces, but the content comes from industry. Because it's industry that knows what they need. It's industry that understands what's coming. You know, I can't remember who it was, but somebody said, I think it was on the first day, we need workers now. We need workers before they're required to work. And how do you do that? How do you accomplish that? And that's industry. Industry, when the leaders of industry manage to pull their heads out of the weeds and manage to look ahead, you can see that, okay, there's 3-4 disruptors coming down the pipeline at me. They're 5 years out. I have no idea which one's going to be. But if you have the internal capability to, or a resource who can help you with the competencies that may be needed, they can articulate that for you, and you can say, there's 5 things coming, I have 5 people that I'm going to give each of you the ability to take on any one of those things. So by the time it gets to you, you're ready for it, right? And so industry can tell you, and then that's supported, obviously, by the training providers, the post-secondaries, and everybody else. That's where that support comes in, because industry says we may need those things. Or industry says, we're needing more of these people, like, you know, Calgary really wanted HQ2, Amazon's HQ2. It was never going to happen. We didn't have 50,000 computer programmers here now. And that's what Amazon was going to show up and be like, boom, 50,000 people are working. We didn't have that. But what we could have done is, you know, not with Amazon, because that was very rapid, but if you can look in the future and industry says, these are the things we need, and then communicates, again, communication and collaboration within the training providers, and you say, I need this. I'm going to need it in 6 months. Some post-secondary education providers could build it in 6 months. Some need 7 years or more. If you're a 7-year or more organization, you need not apply, because industry needs the skills. Again, the skills need to be there before they're needed. And so you need to be quicker, you need to be more agile. But certain things you don't, obviously. I mean, I have an MBA, so I've gone to school for a long time, and there's certain things that you don't need a quick pathway for. But there's other skills, like real relevant skills that you need today. Who's building that for you? Who's doing that for you? And why aren't they doing it for industry? Have you told them? Have you articulated it to them? Have you sat down with somebody and said, build me this? And then they looked at it and were like, done. 6 months later, I've got a course, and 3 months after that, you start getting people out. But you can't do that the way when everyone is working on their own little things all the time, right?
Yeah, that's a challenge. Don't even get me started on the internal bureaucracy.
Oh. Yeah, well, we did the executive brief that I did when we talked about the IEEE, and we introduced it to the group. And there was one individual there, and they are writing a paper on post-secondaries, and they talked about how they start at universities. They often start with a competency question, like, what is the competency we're building? But by the end, it's somehow morphed into what he said. I don't know anything about education, and you'll notice. It says it's now the Carnegie hour. So how many hours did your butt spend in the seat in my classroom? It started with the competency question, but by the time they get to an actual curriculum, it's no longer that. It's now, how many hours can I keep you in this seat? And so we had a whole, after most of the participants left, he ended up staying with us, and we talked for like another hour, like just about the madness of it all, like how close we are, and yet we just can't fit the pieces together just yet. So. Okay.
Excellent. Time for 1 or 2 more questions. Anything else from the audience? If not, I guess I can add on one. So I guess we've talked a bit about the hiring. Can you talk maybe a bit about more how you would create the kind of progression plan, or maybe modify how you do your performance, annual performance reviews of employees to actually check that they're making these credentials or competencies, and then giving them a more detailed training plan?
Do you want me to talk about it, I guess?
Well, I'm going to throw it over to you, because I don't have much experience with performance evaluations other than the ones I've done myself.
Right.
So,
and this is actually, I've been talking about just this to a few people today, but for me, performance is, you first have to understand if the person can do the work. So the competency profiles, and again, I want to stress that competency profiles are not the cure for all that ails you. In my opinion, they are a foundation, one of the key pieces that you need, because if you're having poor performance from your employees, why? You know, again, that curiosity mindset, start exploring. Why? Are they, especially if you've articulated well through understanding the competencies that are required, you're now able to look at that person and say, I see. This is what we need, and you're here. And you're just short. And that's why performance isn't good. So now, again, you close that gap as quickly as you can. And now once you understand that, yes, this person is capable of doing the job I've asked them to do, you can now start working on performance metrics. Now you can say, oh, now I need you to do X number, let's pretend it's manufacturing. I need you to build 100 widgets an hour. But you didn't understand how this machine worked, and you didn't know how to set it up right. So how can I possibly have gotten 100 units out of you? You're going to have problems. It's the same thing if you're a manager or a frontline leader of any sort. Again, one of the speakers, there's so many great speakers here over the last 2 days. So it's like I wrote crazy notes, but you take the smartest person on your team, the most capable person on your team, the most technically gifted, and then you shove them into a leadership role. And for some people, that's perfectly fine. But for some people, it's actually the worst performer, on the front line. That would have been the best choice. You should have put that person up there. But if you don't understand, now you've put someone way out of their element. Now you're dealing with imposter syndrome. Now you're dealing with someone who's covering their butt, who's micromanaging. And why do you micromanage? Because you're happy here. You're not happy leading. You're happy doing. And so if you don't understand that, and this manager's not performing well, what's going to happen? How often do you go to that manager and say, hey, listen, we made a mistake. Would you like to come back down? 99% of the time, they're going to be like, yes, please, because I'm terrible at this. I don't want to be here anymore. No, what do? You're fired. Or we work them until they quit. And then we complain, oh, we can't find good managers. Well, that's because you've driven them out of your organization, because they're not supposed to be there.
Is that the Peter's principle? You promoted the highest level of incompetence?
Yeah. Right? You might be. I'm not familiar, but it might be. But I mean, that's the reality of it. And like, I used to be a correctional peace officer, and that was one of those things that they always said. It was the poop rises to the top. And it was this ingrained belief there. And I mean, in some cases they were right, but in many cases they weren't. It was just people were out of their element. And when you can't help them, when you can't develop them, and they're out of your element, how long do you last? How long can you last? I remember my first 2 years of going to Gen. I was a casual, so I didn't go there. Like, I wasn't a full-time worker. But when I would go there, I would have a pit in my stomach because I didn't know who the hell I was going to work with. Was it going to be one of the good officers? Was it one of the bad officers? Was I going to be on the unit where I was going to have to deal with more fights or not? I didn't know, and I'd be like, ooh. It took me a while, and it took me working with a couple of really great staff who were just like, they guided me through it. They helped me understand. And then I started being like, oh yeah, no problem. And I started showing up, and people's attitudes towards me changed. And then the last few years of me working there, they were amazing. And I had other casuals telling me what to do, and full-time staff were like, shut up. Do you know who this is? Then shut up. And I'd be like, oh, you're standing up for me. I didn't need you to, but thank you. But it was those first years, I hated it. I kept it because it was an excellent job to have during school, because they'd call you up if they needed you, and it was decent money. But that's the way people live. And how many people here went through something like that, where you're sitting around and you're like, I hate my job. I hate everything about my job. But why do you hate it? And why'd you take it if you hate it? But if you hate it, what could be changed to make you not hate it? What is missing? Again, and for me, that's that competency piece, because now I'm able to explore. Now I have something to start with. It's not the be-all and end-all, but I can start with something and have exploratory conversations with you. And we can figure out, why are you struggling? And, long-winded answer, as always.
Yeah, no, excellent. And actually, I'm in the building industry, so it's almost kind of like you start with an energy audit to know where you are. And once you know where you are, it's a lot easier to know where you want to get to. If
Exactly.
you don't know where you are to begin with, it's really hard.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that is about time for today. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you guys for attending, and hope you learned a little bit and enjoyed the day.
Thank you.